Hello, and welcome to Regrets I've Had a Few. I'm Paul Hunter, Artistic Director of Told by an Idiot, and this is a podcast where I talk to friends and colleagues delving into what made them the person they are today.
Hello, and welcome. My guest this month is a writer, performer, and provocateur. She describes her work as wrestling with female, Jewish, and queer identities and their intersections. She also has some of the best ever titles. I particularly like her Margaret Thatcher inspired show, The Lady's Not for Walking Like an Egyptian, which is one of my favorite titles of all time. She's also very funny. Welcome, Rachel Mars.
Thanks for having me.
Not at all.
It's always fun to have your own words read back at you, isn't it?
Well, they're very good. I like lots of your words. I'll be quoting a lot of your words back at you. They're very, and you don't even have to appear like a slippery politician. You can embrace and own them.
I can say yes. Yes, I wrote that and I meant it.
Now, I have to say, for the listeners' benefit, there is a connection between you and Told by an Idiot, which goes some way back. So
Really?
far back, I couldn't quite remember the actual year, but you brilliantly worked for us in a kind of administration producing capacity when we had offices at Battersea Arts Centre, I think.
Yes. I couldn't check. I was like on my bicycle yesterday, not in the rain, trying to figure out the exact connection. And I have got there.
Oh,
if
yeah,
you're
go on.
interested. So I went to Leeds University.
Yeah.
And you came and did, I think, a clown workshop or
Yes.
sort of commedia workshop.
Yeah.
And we'd been to see you as a like cohort, as a class, the night before. See, this is where it gets a little bit hazy.
Yeah.
Perhaps in Sheffield.
Yeah,
It wasn't in Leeds. It wasn't in Leeds.
I think in that time we did a lot of shows at Sheffield Crucible. It would have been there. Yeah.
So I think it would have been there. And the show was very good. I can't remember what it was. We can try and work out that.
Okay. Yeah.
And I just thought, this is really good. I like this. This is the sort of thing that I want to be around. And so then when I graduated, I was fortunate because my parents lived in Acton, still do. And so I was one of those people that could do a bit of work for free. And so I went literally came knocking on the door at Battersea Arts Centre, and met Ghislaine, who was producing for you then, and just said, can I come and figure out how you're running this company? And so then that was it, really. And then Apples and Snakes, the performance poetry people, were next door, and she was like, they actually could pay. So I split my week.
Yes.
I split my week.
No, I'm glad you found people who treated you properly, Rachel.
Times have changed. Times have changed.
Well, yeah, that is exactly. Do you remember what year it was?
It must have been 2000, either 2002 or the beginning of 2003. I think it might even have been autumn of 2002.
Wow. Yes. Gosh, that is. Anyway, let's not dwell on the past. We will dwell on the past.
No,
your
we're still
past,
young.
your past in particular, shortly. But I was interested when that brief description of your work and what interests you, and this is kind of connected, I suppose. And maybe I don't know what your thoughts are around this, because on holiday I was reading this book about Mike Nichols, the American director and improviser, and of course he was talking a lot of the time about being Jewish and what that meant in relation to his everything and humor in particular. And I was just intrigued by where your humor comes from, or your sense of comedy. What can you trace that back to, or who can you trace it back to?
I can trace it back really clearly to Dinner Times.
Okay.
Basically, just because, and the first, my partner is coughing in the background. I'm being heckled in my own house.
That's all right.
Have you got something to add? No, apparently not. So Dinner Times, because it was a joke. It was just a joke and storytelling family. It wasn't like there was only 4 of us, but it was really about, like, my dad had 4 brothers and they used to gag tell, I think, together, and they got up to all sorts. They lived in Blackpool and they were just naughty and got up to all sorts. So there was constant like retelling of their stories from childhood, which had gag punchlines. And then there was just actual jokes, like a lot of actual Jewish jokes. And then I got what's the by the Each Peach Pear Plum people. There's like a starter joke book that I constantly give to my friends' kids now, which I will remember shortly.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's the kind of classic joke. It's a skinny one, and I just got obsessed with jokes from that point. And then kind of every year would get one of those like 1001 jokes for kids, 5001 jokes for kids, 10,000 until they get like sort of yellow pages, and was absolutely obsessed with them. And then the sort of major joke book, which I still love, is a Leo Rosten joke book. So he's like he's dead now, but his sort of, he's known for this book called The Joys of Yiddish.
American
like
or British?
American, yeah, Jewish American kind of Yiddish storytelling guy. But he just had a book called Leo Rosten's Book of Laughter, and it was like an insight. I sort of memorized it, and then would sometimes look at the punchline first and try and work back. So it became this kind of like quite
Is this
analytical.
you as a child deconstructing
This is me, early teens, I think.
Okay.
Trying to like figure out why it was funny, and really got obsessed with the like minutiae, the number of beats.
Yeah.
Because I get so annoyed because my mum can't tell jokes at all, and I get so annoyed with her if I was like, you can't have the words of the punchline in the setup. You can't have that. Like that's ruining it. And like, oh no, you've put one too many syllables in that, so it's not going to pay off in the same way. So yeah, just became like completely obsessed with the kind of the mechanical structures of gags.
I'm going to have to. Can you get hold of this book you just mentioned?
Yeah, you can. And it starts with this preface, which is itself hilarious, called like, I don't know, 37 Ways Not to Tell a Joke.
Okay.
Which is, it's really like, it's Talmudic. That's the other thing, because it's like, it's really goes in hard on kind of so-and-so, he says it's like this, and so-and-so says you should do this, but I say. So it's always like, Judaism has this like constant analysis and discussion of things, and no answer is ever right until someone declares that they're the one with the right answer.
And it's that approach to the jokes, to the gags.
Yeah, I think so. He's always like, never say, when you're starting a joke, never say this man went to the doctor, because then we'll say, what man? You either have to say a man or Shlomo went to the. So it's kind of, it's at this like molecular level.
I think I'm going to enjoy that very much. So thank you for that recommendation. What about as a family? Was there a tradition of going to see performance when you were young?
I was really lucky, and I've actually thanked my parents for this recently, because they, I'm trying to think if they, as children, because they were like working class people, one in Blackpool, one in Nottingham, and I think they might have gone to Panto, like every year. My dad, maybe because he was Blackpool, might have gone to more sort of peer entertainment. In fact, I think he did. And I remember him saying that he took himself off to see Billy Connolly when he was a folk performer, before he was doing comedy. So I think and I don't know where that comes from actually in his family, but I was given that opportunity by them. So we would go, and also because we were in London, so I was lucky.
Yeah.
So we'd go to Panto, and we'd go to, we go to the theatre. I got taken out of quite a few things because I found them must have upsetting.
What sort of things were you seeing? I'm intrigued.
Bloodletting for children. No, what was I? Peter Pan. I remember being taken out of Peter Pan at the Barbican.
What did you find upsetting about that?
I think anything to do with grief and loss.
Okay.
Anything to do with separation.
Okay.
Holocaust family.
Of course.
We can trace that back quite quickly. Yeah. I just couldn't cope with it.
You weren't offended by any of the delivery of the jokes. It wasn't that good.
The 4-year-old. I'm out.
I'm out.
They started
You can't possibly have that in your joke.
But yeah, I was really lucky. And at that point, we didn't have we had a Tory government, but they were still letting people go to the theatre in schools.
And so could you don't have to identify this, but was there a point when you started to think, oh, I'd like to perform?
Yeah, I think there was, I'm laughing because I was at a school where they had like head girls and things like that.
Yeah.
and I was I was a deputy head girl, and I wasn't allowed to be a head girl because I was deemed to be a loose cannon, which was correct.
You proved
And
that correct. That much we know.
and I think with that came like doing assemblies or something.
Yeah.
And I remember we had to do an assembly for Harvest Festival, and we pretended that we'd found this like sort of story about, I don't like, a bit like Wind in the Willows, a story about shrews frolicking, and we hadn't, and we'd written it, but we pretended that it was like, you know,
a
canonical
lost text.
And I think that's when I thought, this is great, like this is really fun, and the kind of listening to the audience that you have to do, and sort of, I guess it was like the translation of the molecular study of jokes on paper and delivery, but then actually having an audience and going, oh, hang on, if I put an extra pause in here, it doesn't work. But if I cut it, it does. So I think I was probably about 16, maybe.
And also it's interesting because it wasn't just a performative thing. You obviously wrote something. Was that with someone else, with your friends, or?
That was with the two other head girl people who were also, I mean, none of us should have been in those positions of power.
Did you ever come clean about this not being a lost text? And no, now it's out there. People might feel cheated.
Cheated
that they believed in this.
Yeah, but then I didn't write sort of through university. Not
Where
really.
did you go to university, Rachel?
So at Leeds.
Of course you did. And what were you doing? Theatre?
So I was doing English and theatre. It was like a joint thing. And lots of amazing theatre makers have come out of that course. So like Chris Thorpe is out of that, a performer called Lucy Ellinson, Dan, but like lots of extraordinary people. But it was really quite an academic focus. It wasn't a training. The most practical things we did were things like when you came and did workshops. But it was absolutely not. It was not really a training. So you did a bit of performance through it, but it was mainly kind of like I don't know, study, which I liked, because I quite like that approach to performance.
And what kind of what were you seeing that was inspiring you when you were at Leeds?
So it was that sort of period of you. People
ridiculous,
like us.
Ridiculousness.
Yeah, ridiculousness. People like us. Only things that end with us. It was that period. I'm trying to think. So it's kind of devised, quite physical, comedic stuff was the stuff that I was going, oh, hello. A company called Theatre O, who then changed.
I remember Theatre O,
Joseph. That sort of thing. So it was that world, and that was I sort of funny, but also doing stuff with form. Those sort of things were really, really inspiring.
And when you were there, were you, because I'm interested in, I'll come to this in a second, but the times that you create alone and the times when you collaborate. And was that a time of collaboration?
It was collaborative. And I remember we did these sort of leaving projects that were already collaborative, and that's when I was like, oh, this is a really interesting. It kind of gave me permission to write, because I didn't feel like I could write on my own at that point. But if you were kind of devising together and ending up with the text, then it felt like
it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we've had this, debate internally and externally for like 29 years about what is writing, and I can totally relate to what you're saying, that somehow I always felt a slight imposter syndrome around being a writer, because I didn't write a play. And often I was writing through physical action or through improv on the floor, and this chimed with the Mike Nichols thing I read as well, and he was doing all his improvising, that somehow it's not writing in the same way. And it took a long time for me to own that and say, no, this is writing. It's just a different form of writing. So I can totally relate to that. I always felt, oh, I can't call myself a writer. I've got to be part of something else that isn't quite that.
And that feels like a kind of like a horrible British fallout of Shakespeare.
Like
the kind of male auteur thing. And actually, I wrote a play.
Oh yeah.
in lockdown. It was like the first time I'd sat down on my own and been quiet and tried to write a play with characters. I'd never done that before.
Wow.
And I just thought, this is appalling. This shouldn't be allowed. Like, this is dictatorial. It's like a worldview that I don't like. The process of it creates this worldview that I abhor, of like one person creating a world and pretending that they've made loads of people. No, you haven't. They're all just from your head. And then so I was like, oh yeah, this is like, of course, in lockdown there were different ways of making, but I did suddenly go, no, there's a reason that we've all been making collaboratively, and it's because it's you know, socialist, and healthy and feminist and all those things,
and democratic.
Yeah.
No, I agree, and I think, I mean, I've always been suspicious of the notion of a singular imagination as well. I think certainly at the Idiots, we've always embraced and thrived off the notion of a very eclectic mix of imaginations that might be shaped in particular ways by particular people, but the voices are all there. And that eclectic thing brings me to the notion of your influences, because even though our work is very different, you make very different work than we do, I think there is a real connection through the eclectic nature of what we're influenced by, because we're often drawn to things where we mix Gunter Grass with Bugs Bunny in the same show. And looking at your list of influences from Morecambe and Wise, Hannah Gadsby, the Gob Squad, Bobby Baker, they're an extraordinary mix. Do you, when you say influence, do you find you go back to these people a lot when you're making stuff?
Yeah, I think I do. Like, especially Morecambe and Wise.
Yeah.
Because again, it's kind of back to the elegance of those rhythms. And yeah, Morecambe and Wise and the Two Ronnies. When I was working with Nat Tarab as a partnership, we'd often watch the Two Ronnies.
Well, also that, as you say, that the rhythmic nature of the Two Ronnies is extraordinary in terms of what you're saying about beats and the precision of what that is. It's true. And I remember briefly, 20 odd years ago, I took over in the play what I wrote in the West End, and I remember Hamish, one of the performers, saying to me, "You've got to really, really learn this before we start rehearsals." And I kind of went, yeah. He said, no, really, really learn it. And he was so adamant that I've never learned anything so well. And of course, he was absolutely right, because every nuance and every beat of that show, which was basically Morecambe and Wise as a kind of, couldn't be in any way slightly vague. It had to be absolutely. And of course, there was an immense freedom in that once I'd learned it. Of course there was, but I can see why you return to those things.
Yeah. There's a discipline to them, because I'm definitely one for like, sort of know it.
Yeah.
That used to get me in trouble with Nat, because Nat Tarab, who we made work for so long together, like she's a stickler for she's a stickler for everything, which is why I work with her, because I'm very broad brushstrokes across.
Well, that's everything. You complement each other, obviously.
Yeah, it was good. She's very strict.
I don't think in any double act there's room for two sticklers.
There can't be, because
there can only be one stickler.
Yeah, and it was her. And so she'd learn like to the letter. And I would have a rough estimation, and she'd be always furious because it was a kind of classic, you know, straight. She was the sort of straight man in many ways. Also, she's 6 foot tall. Like, she's very tall. And
perfect physical contrast is good.
Great. But she'd always be slightly furious that I would get away with it, that I'd kind of roughly know it and get out on stage and get away with it. But I was just loving being live.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting thing. And I can think of other people, and sometimes it drives other performers up the wall. I mean, you mentioned people like us, and a man who's worked with us a lot as a Genius Clan is Javier Marthan, and Javier has a very tangential relationship to any kind of structure, and you have to embrace that. But when I've heard people say, we worked with Javier and he was a nightmare, and I thought, well, you clearly have tried to control him. There's no point in, if you're going to work with him, you've got to give him free rein, otherwise he will drive you mad. I think that tension between, it was actually Javier who said, for me, the best ever description of what acting is. Javier said, acting is giving a and not giving a at the same time.
Yes.
And I think for all the books you can read or the drama schools, I think that is basically it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. And
any type of performing.
Yeah, it has it. You can't, because you can't do it if you don't give a
Yeah.
and if you give too much of you can't do it because
Exactly.
you're just trapped.
So that's the tension that we're. What
That would save a
about
lot of people money on drama school. wouldn't it?
exactly save them a fortune? All those expensive MAs. What about we mentioned Morecambe Wise, the two Ronnies. What about women who've made you laugh?
Yeah, I mean, I was watching French and Saunders
Yeah.
VHSs to
Yes.
age me, although I've already aged myself by saying when I graduated, obsessively.
Yeah.
And then the kind of in-person, the kind of real in-person switch that happened for me was this week with Stacey McKeeshy,
Yeah.
who was working with Apples and Snakes. So she's a Hawaiian sort of, I think she described herself as a performance artist, but Apples and Snakes were this performance poetry organization I'd been working with, and like, you know, very inspired by a lot of the performers I was seeing, but there was this kind of wing of them who seemed to cross over into something else. So sort of she was one of them, Curious, so Helen Paris and Leslie Hill, and I was like, what is this? Because they seem to be working with props, they're working with music, they're working with physicality. I don't know what this is. And it turned out that that was the kind of edges of performance art.
Yeah.
And so I did a week's workshop with her and actually met Nat there back in Leeds. And so I think for so many people, if you scratch the kind of performance art weirdos a little bit, they've all been taught by her at some point, because she just gives people the kind of confidence and the skills to just go and make and not feel that, you know, that they need to like study and study and study before they do it.
And also that sense of making and not knowing, I think, is really important, because we still predominantly, because we have a literary culture still very much in our theatre, which is deadening.
Yeah.
It's all about knowing, and I think it's really crucial that you can find a place to go, I don't know, I'm going to do this, I have no idea.
The idea of like going into a rehearsal room with a script at the beginning,
I know, it's weird, isn't it?
So weird. I mean, like, I get it, sure,
yeah.
but wow, you got 3 weeks and you already know the script. Okay,
no,
that
it's
sounds nice.
reassuring,
just a totally different
sometimes.
way of working. But yeah, so lots of women, and then kind of Joan Rivers, and the kind of like those people, Lily Tomlin, a lot of Americans.
Sarah Bernhardt, not Sarah Bernhardt, Sandra Bernhardt.
Sandra
Bernhardt was
Bernhardt,
Edwardian actor. But...
yeah, I didn't know her. She's not on YouTube.
No.
Yeah, very much so.
Because I remember seeing Sandra Bernhardt for the first time. I didn't know who she was when she gives that extraordinary performance in the film King of Comedy.
Yes.
And I just thought, who is this? And I didn't know her as a stand-up or anything, really. That's the first encounter with her. An extraordinary performer. And it felt incredibly, not just charismatic, but very audacious, which brings me to my next point. I was very intrigued about a workshop you did around discovering your own audaciousness or something.
Oh, yeah.
What is that?
So that is, so I have these kind of, I'm a bit like polyamorous in my affection, my theatre affection. So I have these kind of different, sometimes, like I was saying, sometimes I work on my own, sometimes I work in partnership. And I have a long ongoing partnership with an artist called Greg Wohead. And we made a show, which is to date the naughtiest thing I've ever done, called Story Number One, which we could only be this naughty because it wasn't funded. It was just us being like, let's do this once, where an audience, it's 2 and a bit hours long. The audience come in, the first nearly full hour is an entire episode of Come Dine With Me, which we're just screening. We're not there. So this kind of cooking competition, people don't know it. The second bit of it is that we've written fan fiction. We do actually finally come on, and we've written sort of fan fiction for each of the characters in Come Dine With Me. And then the third part is these series of emails and letters that we've seemingly written, or maybe we have, maybe we haven't, to reach out to these real people to ask them to come on stage with us. And we tracked them down, and we went to one of the competitors, runs a children's farm. And so we went and,
wow, you actually tracked them down.
Yeah. So it's this kind of thing about the real and the not real, and inviting people to spend some time with people on telly, and then have, like, the kind of areas of consent around imagination when you're taking people into kind of graphic porno kind of fan fiction. Anyway, this is and then being like, oh, by the way, he's he's off stage and he's coming, and what that does to people's inside. So it's very it's like formally really naughty. And so then the language we kept using was audacious, which is interesting that you mentioned it with regard to Cinderella. Like, and so then we did this workshop with people, which was, what is your version of audaciousness? Because actually, for me, actually, maybe writing a play is audacious.
That's what I was about to say. I think being audacious is not necessarily to shock. It doesn't have to be a shocking thing. So maybe, like you say, you writing a play in lockdown was maybe quite audacious, because we wouldn't expect that.
No, and I wouldn't expect it of myself. And so it was a workshop where we were on the kind of banks of this loch in Glasgow with different performers, and they were really spending time with what audaciousness meant in society, what it meant to them in terms of their back catalogue. So it was people that had made work before, and what would really, like, they would wake up the next day and be shocked to find that they had made this piece of work. And it's a nice way of working.
Yeah, it really struck me, and I was quite intrigued on your website. I also, on a side note, I like the debate that you had about whether you had alcohol or mobile phones.
Yeah. On this retreat.
Exactly. Yeah. I thought that in itself. I mentioned earlier your brilliant titles. I'm very, very, again, probably a stickler for titles. I think they're very important, and they're very important to us. And people often say, oh, that's a very idiot title. But we've often had, not arguments, but we've had debates with producers and venues around titles.
I remember you saying, so was it the horse?
Well, this was the one.
Tell me this story again.
Yeah, that was the one where we were doing this show about political acts of political violence, and there were an eclectic mix of things from Bugs Bunny to Gunter Grass, and we stumbled on a joke in different forms that we really liked, which in a way was about someone saying "F you." Well, basically, it was about a cowboy saying "F you" to the Lone Ranger, "F you" and the horse you rode in on. Right. So we thought that's a brilliant title, and I sensed immediately our then producer was uneasy with the title, and I just knew it. So again, maybe a bit pervert, I just thought cheekily, I'm going to carry on with it, and then eventually it came out and said, I'm not sure we can have a title that begins with the word "and." And I literally went, what? Do you mean, no, you can't have a title? And then these marketing people who were paid lots of money went, yes, that's right, you can't have a title that begins with "and." I said, where is this written down? That you can't? But lots of people get saying.
Was the suggestion that people would feel that they'd missed something?
Maybe. Maybe.
Why? That's such an odd rule.
But it was more alarming. The amount of very professional people with high paid jobs said, no, you can't have that. It's really weird, isn't it?
It's wild.
Anyway, I hope you continue with your audacious titles, because they're rather brilliant.
I've gone quite singular recently. I've gone on a single word. I think it's time to go long again.
Yeah, long's good. We just made a show called "Would You Bet Against Us," which was
that's a great
title.
Was
inspired by the greatest ever achievement of my football team, and the parallel narrative of my foolhardy attempts to make it from a council house in Birmingham into the world of show business. So the two events coincided. But we liked "Would You Bet Against Us?"
Yeah, that's a great title.
Which was a quote. But also, I don't know with this, because obviously your work is very personal as well, and often our work is. But I'm always fascinated by what an audience accepts. So we did a show called My Perfect Mind a few years ago with myself and an old actor, Edward Pefferbridge. And there is a point towards the beginning of the show where I say to the audience, everything you're about to see is absolutely true. And the amount of people afterwards who came up to me in the bar and said, really enjoyed the show. So were you really in that bad production of the American Musical with Edward? I said, yes, I told you it was true. Oh, did you really? And it was really interesting because we stood on stage and I said it.
Yeah.
They immediately weren't sure.
But I think I was just having this conversation the other day with Greg, which is which is slightly different from what you do, although maybe not with these ones where you're talking about that it's personal experience. But if you seem to be Rachel Mars or Paul Hunter or whatever, talking on stage, and it seems to have an I voice to it, people immediately, maybe if you don't say this is all true, people will immediately assume that it's 100% true, and then if they find out that it isn't, they get very affronted. And you kind of go, it's theatre, like what? But it's the, I think it's the I voice.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. But I mean, another example from the same show is Edward, who was 80 years old and an extraordinary performer, but he injured himself slightly, so we had to change the show quite a lot. And then we held the audience outside at the Young Vic, and I went on and made an announcement at the beginning to say sorry for the delay, but one of the actors has suffered an injury. There's only 2 of us in it, so I didn't say who it was. We had to change some stuff. I hope you enjoy the show. So we did the whole show, and several people came up to me in the bar and said, really love the show. I love the bit where you came on at the beginning and said, it's happened. I tried to say it as neutrally and as honestly as I could. But because of what followed that announcement, they assumed, that's part of the show.
It's a thing. It's a bit.
It's a bit.
Yeah. You can't. I mean, I don't. You can't escape it. I don't think we can escape it. This kind of question of fact and fiction all the time. So then it's just a question of how you play with it, really.
Yeah, and that's the joy of it, isn't it? The joy of. I often say when I'm sort of talking about our type of shows, that we don't always do them, but those shows that sit in that place, I have no interest in everything being true. It's just a jumping off point. So in that show, Edward, we had a scene when he was a child at a talent competition, and we were going to stage that idea, and I was the compere. And in real life, he didn't win. And myself and Catherine Hunter, the director, said, well, you've got to win in our show. Yeah. There's no way you can come third behind the girl playing the violin. But the great thing was, the audience, of course, loved it when Edward won. But Edward really didn't like the fact that we didn't. So over the applause, you could hear him going, "It's not true. I didn't win. I didn't win."
That's like, he's British, right?
Yeah, it's very English.
Can you imagine in America people being like, just so you know, I didn't win?
Exactly. It's such an English thing, isn't it?
I don't want to claim a win that isn't mine.
Exactly. I'm not comfortable with that. I wanted to come back, if I may, to the comedy thing. And I suppose the Jewish thing comes back to Mike Nichols. And I was just looking at this quote. He was doing an interview again that I'd read. And he said, he was talking about how he wished sometimes that Jewish people could poke themselves a bit more in the ribs. And he went on to say, you know what the problem is? Among many other things, correctness. Correctness was such a blight on humour and the truth. One of the joys of the producers was that every possible correct position was exploded, and you just sat there howling and grateful. It was the death of correctness in a way.
Interesting. I would disagree with him.
No, that's why I'm interested. That's why I wanted to get your view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with him about the producers.
No.
He's bang on. That's what it's doing. I would say right now, all the Jews I know are busy whacking themselves super hard in the guts. Yeah. And sort of, I don't know, I was going to say, and have ever been. So I'm interested that he thinks that sort of we, whatever that means, monolithic Jews, don't. Because I think that's the Jewish joke is always that the Jew is the schmuck.
That's the feeling I get when I look at that tradition going right back.
Always. And like my favorite, I won't do the whole thing.
No,
my favorite, like one of my favorite gags is a Holocaust era gag about a guy who's Jewish old man who's digging the road for punishment, and a gorgeous huge Volkswagen pulls up, and Hitler and his guards get out, and Hitler comes over with the guards, and the guards point the gun at this old guy and point to a cow pat and says, "Jew, eat the cow pat, and so otherwise we'll shoot you." And so he has to. And then later that night he goes home and his wife says, "How was your day?" And he says, "You'll never guess who I had lunch with." And it's like it's maybe that's not poking yourself in the gut. Maybe that is making you the victor of a terrible situation. It's an interesting line, isn't it, between what's poking yourself in the gut and what's making you the victim of something terrible.
It is a brilliant gag and a perfect place to draw this all too brief conversation to an end. Rachel, it's been such a pleasure. Before we go, I'm going to ask you 7 quick fire questions.
Okay.
You don't need to think about it. Your first response. If you don't understand anything, still your first response is fine. You'll understand all of this. New York or LA?
New York 100 times.
Morecambe and Wise or Tommy Cooper?
Morecambe and Wise.
Red wine or a mobile phone?
Ooh, sadly a mobile phone.
Oh,
and I hate what that reveals about me. But there we are.
Mastermind or University Challenge?
Mastermind.
Going back to 90s comedy, Green Room or Smack the Pony?
Smack the Pony.
Frida Kahlo or Paula Rego?
Paula Rego.
Pool or darts?
Pool.
Writing or performing?
Well, I hate that one. Can that be my response?
You can say both.
No, I can't say both. Writing or performing? I maybe at the moment writing because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
If you asked me 3 years ago, not that.
No, and it'll change again. Rachel, it's been so lovely talking to you and brilliantly insightful and entertaining as ever. That joke has made my day. I will look up what's the name of the book I need to get?
You need to read Leo Rosten's Book of Laughter, Rosten.
Leo Rosten's book. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Rachel. Have a good day.
Thanks for having me. Ta-ra. Bye.
Take care.
Dear listeners, if you've enjoyed this idiot podcast, please spread the word